Well, welcome back everyone to Frontlines and Faultlines with Mike Kelly. Continuing our unpacking of the October 7th heinous savagery and the impacts of that, obviously, in Israel, there is a wider story to be told here, and that is the impact of the 7th of October throughout the Jewish diaspora and the waves of anti-Semitism we've seen consequent upon that, and how do individuals deal with that, and what are the contexts that they've had to deal with it, and who are the main problems in applying that sort of pressure and the attacks that people have endured. Unfortunately, to unpack that today, I'm very lucky to have with me Tamar Paluch and Lee Kofman, who have written a magnificent book called Ruptured, which is a bestseller now, and it is for a reason. It's a compilation of really powerful individual stories of people who have had experiences at every level of society in every field of endeavour. And Lee and Tamar themselves have made a unique contribution to Australia and the world through Lee with her creative. She's a creative herself, and that's been a very problematic sector of society as we've seen that unfold. And Tamar has been engaged in disability issues and occupational therapy and many issues associated with helping those in need. So we've got a couple of people here who have made great contributions to what we call in the Jewish world tikkun olam, which is trying to make the world a healthier place and safer, hopefully, as well. So look, I might just start with you, Lee. Obviously, you've written a lot of books, and you've spent a lot of time in the creative world. You've got a lot of creative friends, and in your book, you've uncovered some stories here which are incredibly distressing of how people have been cancelled, marginalised, and aggressive communications with them. Where did you get the idea for the book, and did someone suggested it to you, or how did that happen?
Well, actually, thank you so much, Mike, for having us here. Actually, this question should be directed to Tamar because the book is a brainchild of Tamar, and even the
Okay,
title of the book is brainchild of Tamar, and she was the one to invite me along. So I'll handball
right.
to
Okay.
you.
Okay. Oh, well, that's interesting because would have thought the author would sort of be going down this road, not the occupational therapist, that you would bring your skills and expertise to it, Tamar. But so, how did you get the idea, Tamar, in the first place?
Well, first of all, if we've already mentioned the occupational therapy, I'll say that I was never conventional in most of the things that I've done, and my occupational therapy also, from very early on in my student career, I was interested in community development and mental health and well-being, so the health of communities really. And one of the things when I first came out of my degree and I went straight into my master's, I was particularly interested in the notion of lived experience. And I did a lot of lived experience work with consumers of the mental health system. And, I also taught students when I was at La Trobe University. I taught students about these like new approaches in occupational therapy. The reason why I say all of this is because never in my wildest dreams, I mean, back then when I would teach these concepts of justice and community health, I wasn't teaching it from the Marxist frameworks that a lot of them have their roots in. Actually, I was teaching it from my Jewish principles, things that I'd been brought up on, what I saw modeled in Israel, for example. That was always what motivated me to teach, and I felt like I could teach that because I came from a group who, my grandparents came from they were survivors. They experienced the whole, cycle of becoming Australians. And for me, I always came from that place of like a deep sense of justice and understanding of what it is to be from a survivor community. And I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would have to one day train that lens of lived experience on my own community that's ostensibly privileged and become very lucky in terms of their migrant success story. And yet, in the wake of October 7, all of a sudden, as I started kind of watching what was going on, I started to understand, like for me, it was very clear very early on that the lack of response by the government was going to lead to the surge in anti-Semitism that was already coming across the oceans was going to turn ugly pretty fast. And then indeed, as we saw the beginnings of doxing in Australia and then the culmination of that big group, the Zio 600, I understood in conversation with people who had been in that group that actually this was really affecting people on a deeply personal level, and that people felt like they were losing their voice, that they were losing their ability to see their place in society. And all of a sudden, all my kind of professional frameworks started to make sense to me in this context. And I was really interested in trying to capture that lived experience. And together with a group of women who I'd been doing activism with, we really started to try and find ways to help women reclaim their stories and their narratives. And so that started as a social media campaign and then a community-wide writing initiative that we then realized we were going to get so many rich materials that we should really take some of these materials and create something from it. So where we started from a very dark place, we wanted to have a creative response to this grief. And I had known Lee from my writing hobby prior to this time. And Lee was obviously involved in that doxing situation, sadly. And we asked her, Lee, would you be interested in coming on board and help other people make sense of what's going on? And that's how the book came out.
Right. And so the purpose that you had in mind was to contribute to the healing and support for those who are sort of enduring all these, attacks and the isolation they felt.
100%, yeah. That, and I think also like just that, the power of writing as a collective is also really important in community development work. So that was like really obvious to me from the work I had done earlier. And then of course there was the very Jewish act of writing as a means of committing memory to paper and remembering a point in time while we were living it in Technicolor. Because I think a lot of people all of a sudden, like the way they were experiencing it was like, wow, this is Technicolor Jewish history. This is us living Jewish history. It's not us learning about Jewish history. It's not us, kind of looking back at what happened then. Like this is going to be our next chapter. And so for both Lee and I and the other women on the team, that was really critical to capture this moment in time. And indeed, the title Ruptured, I actually want to share the credit, pass the credit on to Rami, who was responsible for designing our brilliant cover. That word kept coming back to us, and we were kind of teasing out what is it that we would really encapsulate the experience of these times. And that really felt so profound, that rupture, that moment in time that everything changed.
Right.
Can I just add to this? So when Tamar approached me initially, all these purposes really resonated with me. But we also had another purpose for this book, which personally for me is probably the one that drives me the most.
Right.
And that is, again, sort of kind of in line with the Jewish concept of tikkun olam, the repair of the world. So for both Tamar and I, it's very important, has always been important from the very start of this book, that we are not just writing for the echo chamber of our community. We really wanted to use this book as a kind of a bridge to reach out to over the rupture, but also as you said so well, Mike, before, after October 7, we Jewish community was met with extraordinary silence at best and recriminations at worst, and there was no space for any nuanced conversations. It's literally like just like talking to one of my little children who always wants to know, are you for or against something? And so for us, what we were hoping will happen with this book, and I think Tamar will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it is already happening more than we imagine, but it will be a conversation opener, a conversation starter, or as I see it, even an invitation to people to come to talk to us or to talk among them. And really, since the book came out 5 weeks ago, we've had a lot of extraordinary conversations with non-Jewish people.
Right. And I guess it's therapy to be able to put your thoughts and your voice on paper. But there were people who were reluctant to do that because they feared the response or the reaction. And And I think there was at least one person who withdrew their piece, wasn't there?
Yeah, actually more than one. It ended up being by the time we finished putting the book together. Yeah, I mean, look, there is a real fear, as you probably know, Mike, to speak up as a Jewish person these days. I've experienced it myself personally for a very long time now, way before the book came out, when I started speaking up against anti-Semitism. But it's not just me. I mean, there's so many essays in the book that describe what happens when you just admit to being Jewish and just say things like, well, the situation is complex, our community is suffering. And the most important thing that I, I always say since October 7, and not many people want to hear, is that it's absolutely extraordinary, the conflation between the Jewish community in Australia and a foreign conflict that happens many, many kilometers away. So once you say things like this, as one of our contributors, for example, Dina Amy Kaplan, who is an actor and a singer and writes, once you say something like this, the gates of hell are open. Dina lost work, lost many followers. She has big followers on her social accounts because she used them for work. She lost friendships, and I think this is an experience that's shared by so many of us.
Yeah, Tamar, just a comment too from you perhaps on one of the things that's been such an important factor in all of this that creates a whole new dynamic is the way social media is the platform by which all of this gets amplified. But more importantly, because of the bias confirming algorithms, you see people disappearing down particular rabbit holes, circling up opinions in a tight circle, and not being able to, or not willing at all to hear evidence or facts. And to your point, Lee, the Middle East is one of the most complex pieces of real estate on earth, and the complexity has been glossed over. But in terms of that social media dimension, you must have seen in your work how people who are victimized on social media, the impacts that has, and the sort of psychological damage that can be done.
Yeah, certainly. I think that in those early conversations I had with people, what struck me so much was that it really sent people into an existential spin. When your personal life intersects with discrimination and vilification, misrepresentation, I think, um, everything kind of just really spins out of control. And a lot of people were feeling like that they had been totally cut loose all of a sudden, a world where Jewish identity was and their affinity for Israel was not the center of their identity. All of a sudden, it totally transformed all the parameters of that. And all of a sudden they were being defined by things that usually they hadn't said, but like certainly by this identity that had always just been part of who they were. And that foisting of an identity that you have not even been asked about or even like being able to self-determine was really, really harrowing for a lot of people because it also imperiled so much in their real lives. And I think it was in those conversations that I all of a sudden understood like the evidence base that says, that mental health is so strongly tied to discrimination and vilification. I was like, oh, this is, what we're seeing in real time. And so, yeah, I remember speaking with one person who was trying to process all these events on the background of, marital breakdown and so she was taking it in one direction, someone else I spoke to was taking it in another direction. So that intersection of where vilification meets you and then you as someone who's part of a community or who wasn't part of a community, a Jewish community necessarily, as their primary community, was a really confounding place for people. And I think it's really interesting also because I think, one of the things that we talk about in the Jewish world now is the October 8 Jews, and those are people who really, like, they were defined primarily, let's say, by their creative occupation, inspired perhaps by their Jewish roots and identity, but not necessarily like the primary community they identified with, and all of a sudden they felt themselves pulled into that fold very strongly, which had resilience building characteristics, but also that journey is not always so simple, especially if you haven't always felt a deep connection to the community prior to October 7th. So it
And
takes
now I
time.
suppose it's probably been amplified by the fact of the revelations that we've had Iranian interference in Australia, fueling and fomenting and organising the more physical and violent elements of the anti-Semitism. So it must just be sort of really, amplifying the effects of what people have been living through as well. And you've probably seen that in your contexts.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you talk to people who have really strong positions on what is happening in the Middle East. Especially the Israel-Gaza war, and sorry, the Israel-Hamas war. And sometimes I speak to these people who are supposed to be very smart people, from my writerly milieu, people who write beautiful books and think about things deeply and with compassion and very careful what they say usually. And you talk to them and they don't even, and when I say things like to me quite obvious, such as, did you know that Hamas is sponsored by Iran? Did you know that Iran was behind October 7th? These supposedly smart people with very strong opinions, which I do not share, but I don't have such strong opinions about anything, apart from wanting the war to end and Netanyahu to go. But when I hear this and these people being so surprised, it just makes me think about, I don't know, like makes me think about myself. Would I, if I was not from Israel, if I was not Jewish, would I be taking such strong stands and about a war I don't understand at all? And I don't think I ever would have been. I'm sorry, I know it's very easy to say in retrospect, but I remember when Balkan wars were happening, and everything was so complicated there. I mean, nobody was pushed to take sides like they are today, but I remember reading and reading and reading about those conflicts and feeling lots of very big feelings, but never professing to become an expert on something like that. And just very quickly about something you mentioned about algorithms, Mike, I just think it's so true that algorithms on social media these days they really determine a lot of people's reactions to a lot of big issues. We have an essay in our collection by Jessica Bowker, who talks about
Yes.
connections. You remember this, the connections she made since October 7 with people, both Jewish people and also people from Palestinian and Arab backgrounds. And
Mhm.
she writes about how she and her Palestinian friend, for example, they often, when they try to work out things between themselves, they compare the social media feeds and they're completely different. It's like they just it's like they're just talking about a completely different war, each one of them.
Yes. And you raised that point about Bosnia. And of course, one of the most horrendous elements of that war was the use of rape as a weapon of war. And one of the most disturbing things, and it's so important that, you've taken this opportunity to really surface women's voices, because the reaction to all we heard from October the 7th must have been particularly painful and disturbing for Jewish women. And in the context where you've seen so much denial, it's just like the Holocaust in many ways, but with much less excuse, with the amount of material that the perpetrators themselves posted up. And of course, you had Pramila Patten, the special representative of the Secretary General of the UN, which is not a particularly meritorious institution these days, but Pramila Patten went through the 50 hours of video material that Hamas themselves posted up and 5,000 photographs, and she described the sexual assaults, the sexual mutilation, as some horrendous material. And that, I think, is one of the most disturbing aspects of this, clearly a systematic and intended approach to humiliating Israel, humiliating women, to depopulate the country, terrorize the country. But what was done to the women during that assault was something I've never experienced. When I was in Iraq and Bosnia, there'd been beheadings, there'd been torture, but the sort of sadistic and gratuitous sexual violence was something beyond anything that I've ever encountered. So was that something that resonated particularly deeply with the people that you talk to and those who have contributed to this book?
Um, so certainly, if I would pinpoint, the place that this book really begins and the rupture that it begins, it's in that violence and the silence that follows. And that is really why we chose to platform women's voices. Also because many of the deniers in Australia were so-called feminist influencers with huge platforms. So tying back into what you were saying about social media, and they, once they were done, or not done, they're still ongoing, but once they had started their little run of denial and total silence, then they started to also run Jewish women through the ground, through the town square for holding the temerity to speak up and say, what is this silence, and to question that silence and to really interrogate that silence. And certainly for Jewish women all around the world, that's been something that has sadly galvanized us. That issue of the silence around the sexual crimes of October 7 is a very, very strong theme in the book. And I think that to this day we see that silence, but we're not willing to abide that silence. And that is what this book is also about, trying to, I guess, say, so many women were silenced that day, and for them, and because of them and for them, we will never be silent. And especially a lot of us mothers to children, as a mother of two daughters, that was really profound. I think it impacted on a personal level, amongst diaspora Jewish women, on all aspects of our womanhood and our relationships and intimacy. And it really pervaded our lives in such a profound way. And in part because we carry trauma in our DNA, we have very strong, history. And so all of a sudden this again was real, it was happening in our time. And it was something that wasn't relegated to the past or stories that our grandmothers had told us, or that are, so.
And that certainly surfaces in some of the stories in the book of those who've, their children or grandchildren of Holocaust survivors who know of the stories and the levels of, insecurity they feel. And of course, that sense in Australia that this was a safe place. It was highly sought as a location for escaping, Europe and, starting a new life, that this would be far enough away from all of that, and it would be a safe place to raise their children and be Jewish. And there's, I think, a sense in some of the stories there where there's this feeling of, like the rug's been pulled from under them, that sense of safety and security in Australia is evaporating.
Can I just talk to, I want to talk to that, being an outsider in Australia who came here 26 years ago. But I also wanted just to add to what Tamar said. I mean, everything Tamar said really resonates with me as well. But for me, what also is striking about the response of the different individual
Right.
feminist organizations to the sexual violence is not just the silence, but the silence was like at best they were silent, but at worst there was so much denial or minimization, or something that to me feels particularly demonic is the contextualizing that sexual violence. Women who would always say, believe the women, who would always say there's no excuse for sexual violence, would contextualize this. And that to me was absolutely devastating. And another thing I want to say is that, and I spoke about this in public already, for me personally, I feel in my own intimate life this impact of the sexual violence of October 7, perhaps because I lived in Israel, and a very big feature of my youth was going to these kind of festivals, music festivals like Noah Festival. It's very easy for me to imagine being one of those girls. But I know that also a lot of other, even much younger, and women who were born in Australia, Jewish women also can feel it. And it's really interesting. I just want to tell a quick story here, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
I was speaking at one of the events about our book, and there was an audience member there who listened throughout the whole, the whole 45 minutes that we had. And I said exactly what I just said here about the impact of October 7 and what Tamar just mentioned. And then there was the Q&A time. And the woman said, look, I think she was born in England. She was been quite a long time in Australia. And she said, look, I listen and I listen. I still don't understand. When the bombings happened in London I think 2005, is that right? When the bombings happened in London, it did not impact me as much as the October 7 impacted Jewish women. And it was just felt as if I didn't speak at all. To compare the two different things. It was like, comparing apples with oranges. And I just thought about this later and I thought, well, yes, Tamar and I intended this book to be a bridge. We intended this to be an opera for conversations, but we probably won't be successful with everybody we will talk because so often people like algorithms, they hear what they really want to hear. But back to this, to what were you talking before? And sorry, I think I got a bit off track, Mike, but can you
Yeah,
just
no, that's
remind me?
fine. It's really important though, because the other side of this that when you look at the way
I
women's
remember.
organisations and the feminist movement did not rally behind, and in fact were quite happy to buy into the denials that they did happen. And I've had friends too that I'd served with in Bosnia in the because I was seconded to the ICRC, coming back at me and saying, oh well, a lot of that was found to be exaggerated, blah blah blah, and in fact the opposite has been proven. But of course, a lot of those women, were silenced because they were murdered. But even the women that survived, of course, so traumatized, are unable to speak about it. So it's very hard to really thoroughly unpack other than through the imagery, which is horrendous. And you can only then imagine what it must have been like. But to see that and to see these organisations made up of all these, progressive women and see progressive society in general as being probably the deepest problem here, adopting Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran as heroes of the left. And when you saw the demonstration on Sydney Harbour Bridge, in one photo I saw an extreme revolutionary Marxist next to a group of men holding up an ISIS flag, and then Labor politicians standing in front of a poster of Ayatollah Khamenei. And, so there's obviously somewhere there's this cognitive dissonance that in that world, you can't do what you're doing here, sitting here with your hair out. You can't be a woman with the rights we enjoy here. You can't be a gay person with the rights we enjoy here. You can't be a free trade unionist. You can't experience elections. And this is the world that they're lining up against. And so that must also be just so frustrating when you're in the so-called progressive creative space and you're seeing people who just are not being rational or don't have the facts and don't want to know those facts.
No, it's all, I really sort of, I try to argue rationally, to speak rationally with with some people from my progressive circles to which I've always belonged, and it took me a few months to realize that this is very emotional. That's why I think rupture, it comes from viscera. There's so much, I mean, because I'm also from Israel. I lived in Israel for 14 years. I was born in Russia, and I witnessed so much sort of internalized hatred or at best, aversion to Israel in my 26 years here, way before October 7th. So I think people react really from viscera, thinking they are thinking. And that's why I think Ruptured is a good way, I find, to open this conversation because it is an emotional book. But I remember now what you were asking us before, Mike, and that was a very good point. You were saying that it came as a shock to a lot of the people in Jewish community in Australia what happened after October 7. And I think it would be interesting for Tamar to talk as somebody who is part of the established part of Jewish community, and I'm an outsider because we have different perspective on that.
Well, as the granddaughter of survivors, certainly, um, when in the days after October 7, I remember just looking at my dad so heartbroken and thinking, you know, I had a golden upbringing. I remember one of my strongest memories, something that's come back to me a lot since October 7 is we have all these photos in our albums of all what was called the Lagerschwester, the camp sisters, the women who my grandmother was in the camps with. And they're all, coiffed and dressed up nicely at our bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs and at the weddings. And it's always the same group of people who survived together, who lost everything. And every time I look at these photos, I think they lost everything, and here they are celebrating the grandchildren that they thought that they would never have. And I remember their embraces a lot, like in these past 2 years, this embrace of like, we succeeded, we gave you everything that you wanted. And really, in that sense, when I think of the safe haven that Australia became for so many Jews, in fact, as you would of course know, Mike, in Australia, outside of Israel, was the home of the second largest group of Holocaust survivors, first largest group of Holocaust survivors outside of Israel after the war. And in part because so many people wanted to get away as far as possible from the horrors of Europe. And so I just remember that embrace for me, I felt that embrace kind of shatter when October 7 happened, that embrace of knowing that they had built and, come so far to give us so much. And so many of us enjoyed the spoils of that, and that's really been transformed for us. And I think that many people, if you just talk to people in the community, often will hear the refrain, I'm so grateful that my grandparents or my parents aren't here to see what's happening. And really interesting, just from a conversation I had the other day, was a friend who was talking about her dad coming to terms with his aging, and he's like in his 70s, and she said that he's so scared to leave. And he's well, all's fine, but he's starting to think about what it means to get to that age, and he's really scared because he doesn't know what the world holds for his children and grandchildren. And that for me was like, when she said it like that, it just gives me shivers just thinking about it now. That is the kind of existential spin we're still trying to balance ourselves in.
Yeah, it must be so gut-wrenching when you know the record of Holocaust survivors in Australia as well, that they took that opportunity to be here to make such a massive contribution to this country in so many ways, in every field of endeavour, and obviously motivated particularly by wanting to build a place for their children and grandchildren to thrive and to feel secure. And so it must be incredibly shattering for them, but also knowing how shattering it is for them, for their families who can feel and experience that pain and proximity to them. And you can see some of that play out in the stories that you've set out in the book. But I was just wondering if, for both of you, if you could both tell me perhaps what was the most impactful story, or were there a series of themes that really made a deep impression? If you could describe maybe some of the content of those stories that really stand out most to both of you.
That's a tricky question, of course, Mike, because you're asking us to choose our favorite children. So I'll go not for the child. I'll go not for an essay, but for a particular theme that really stood out to me through the essays. And that's really this feeling that I can really relate to as well, of being one against the world. It's really difficult. It's like there's a lot of, even though a lot of essays don't spell it out the way I would, but it's a lot about bullying, really, about bullying in the schoolyard. That's how I think a lot of Jewish people, especially Jewish creatives, are experiencing the reality at the moment. So if you look at essays like the one by Nina Sanadze, Police Report, where it's a heartbreaking essay that recounts the horrific othering and bullying she was subjected to from her creative peers. She was, graffitis even were written on the studio where she used to practice her art, something like no doxing or something along those lines. But she was one, and she was accused by her peers of being a bully because she could see complexity in the situation and say, Hamas has a lot of, a lot to answer for in this war. But the whole thing was that she was accused of bullying when she was alone and everybody else was against her. And this comes of essay after essay after essay, especially by creatives, but also some other professionals. I mean, I'm thinking about the essay called Against the Silence by Julia Meyerowitz-Katz. Julia Meyerowitz-Katz is an artist, but she's also a psychotherapist, and she writes about encountering silence at best, again, and very strange responses at worst amongst her professional milieu. So people often, because there is such a powerful stereotypes of Jewish people in Australia and other places as well, very ancient stereotype of us being the powerful, sinister lobby who has everything that they want. Um, People completely, so many people, again, it's a bit like with Iran and Hamas, not realizing that Iran is behind Hamas. A lot of people actually don't realize how tiny community we are. We are 0.4% of Australia's population. So when people ostracize us and dox us and whatever else they do, they forget that they are basically repeating the sort of schoolyard bullying behavior because we are really easy prey. And that kind of relates to what I wanted to say before about this shock that so I'm changing the topic, but it's really relevant to this, what we discussed about the shock, that is a theme that runs throughout our essays, as Tamar described as well, at what happened after October 7th. So to me, being an outsider, being born in Russia, and then living in Israel, then coming here when I was in my 20s, I was shocked by the extent of the vitriol that happened after October 7th, but I wasn't shocked by the fact that it happened. And I think the reason so many Jewish people here in Australia felt so shocked was partly because of this may be controversial, but that's my sense, because of a particular internalized stigma in my observation, a lot of Jewish people in Australia experience. I'm married to a Australian Jew who is third generation in Australia, and I see it at home as well. When you constantly absorb this racism, subliminal messages that you are the powerful, you are the powerful, you are the lobby, you are the rich, and which is of course not true about so many of us. Person, you're the white person, which is completely not true as well. Jews are not white, and for people who don't know it, they shouldn't be talking about Jews. So when you absorb all this, it's very easy to ignore a lot of other very glaring signs that we are not, what things are coming at us, like, the fact that our institutions have always been guarded way, way before October 7, like the fact that Jewish people usually are not included in the benefits of diversity programs. And, I can go on and on about this, but that's just something I wanted to flag. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I just sometimes wonder if the sorts of attacks we've seen in, the Jewish communities where, you tend to feel a bit safer where you've got, the institutions and the community in numbers gives you that sense of strength and security at times, but then that's been specifically targeted with, not only the violence and the arson attacks, but also now demonstrations on places like Bondi Beach. And I can just imagine what the outcry would be if a group of Jews went into Lakemba or in front of the Lakemba Mosque and tried to demonstrate to say, let's all unite to put pressure on Hamas to release the hostages and lay down their weapons. I can just imagine, what the reaction would be, let alone if you then escalated it to say, oh, all Muslims are cruel, etc. And I saw a correspondence between a friend of mine and a senior ABC journalist who has their own program, their own radio program, and they were engaging in relation to an article that my friend had written. And this ABC journalist said he thought it was okay to say the Jews are a cruel people. And he remembered that Australians had said the Japanese were a cruel people after World War II, seeming to say, well, that was okay because, of the way our soldiers had been treated, as prisoners of the Japanese. So he was basically sanctioning, permitting as a gay person and a progressive, the statement that all Jews are cruel people.
Well, can I just say, and then I'll let Tamar talk, of course, but I just want to quickly say this is such a good example of why anti-Semitism is not another form of racism, but I call it racism plus, because we are really the only minority in this country, in my observation, that is not being only discriminated on account of their race and religion, but is also discriminated on account of their supposed or real connection to a country they're affiliated with, based on this real or perceived actions of this country. I cannot imagine any Chinese person, for example, being asked to declare their views on Chinese government before profiling them or platforming them somewhere, or before giving them a haircut, as recently, happened that
Or the
hairdresser.
treatment of the Uyghurs, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Tamar has.
So, Tamar, what sort of stood out for you the most? What really struck home to you the most and caused a serious emotional impact of the stories that you encountered?
So I have two. One is Noah Gomberg. She writes a beautiful essay about what it is to be queer and Jewish today. Basically, when we started the project, one of the restrictions was that you had to be over 18 to submit, and we received this essay and we were reading it like, oh, this is such a powerful essay, and then we're like, hold on, let's try and do the maths. How old is this person? She must be just 18, but actually we discovered she was a high school student still, but she had really been compelled to write her story. And for me, as a mother especially, it was just so gutting to read of a young girl coming to terms with her place in the world as a Jew, and recently, starting to come to terms with her queer identity, which was very fresh for her, and having to navigate it, and the fact that she feels that she has to make a choice, which world she's going to belong to in the paradigm that's been established since October 7th. So I found that really challenging as a mum, and I can just tell you that actually today someone asked me if I have any essays by teenagers, and my daughter happened to be nearby, and I kind of didn't really want to talk about it in depth next to her. My daughter's 10, and so I said to the woman, oh yeah, there's an essay on this topic. My 15-year-old, I'll send it to you later. She hasn't gotten a copy of my book yet, of the book yet. But and then at home, my daughter's like, what was that girl writing about? The one who's only 15, because my daughter, she's 10, but she's an aspiring grad already. So, and I had to have a conversation with her about, it's happened many times, but this was particularly excruciating to have a conversation where she needs to understand that, like, these trials by fire that young people are having as they negotiate their identity in the world as a Jew. And it's kind of hard because I didn't have to, mine was all theoretical, and for these kids it's real. So that was one of the profound essays for me. And the other essay which I found particularly profound was by Melinda Jones. She writes about being involved in the Israeli-Palestinian peace movement, the women's movement specifically, and her crisis of faith in that movement, and what that meant to her in those days. Vivian Silver, of course, was a resident of one of the kibbutzim. She was the mother of the Israeli-Palestinian peace movement, and she was murdered, like many of the people murdered on that day. They were peace activists. And I would say I'm pretty firmly central in my politics, but certainly believe that the Palestinians deserve a better life than what Hamas offers them, and I certainly believe in their self-determination. But in this particular essay, I really identified with a lot of her, the breach of that faith in the two-state solution and in the trust the basic interpersonal trust that existed. And I was really inspired by her willingness just to keep on despite it all, and to look for the light. And that certainly was a theme that was resonant on many levels. How do we keep moving towards a better future? Because no one's going anywhere. So that was another essay that was profound for me.
Can I just add to this? Tamara, you're right. It's a wonderful essay by Melinda Jones, so also honest. Can I just, there's kind of a happy-ish ending to this story. And that is just last week I attended a wonderful event organized by Melinda Jones in Australia of Women Wage Peace, which is the organization that I was referring to. So Melinda is back on board with renewed faith, working towards promotion of coexistence, and she brought here to Australia Palestinian women, Israeli women, and who work together for coexistence.
Yeah, and it's important that we come to that too, to talk about the future and where we go from here. But I will say that story where, a parent is looking at their child and saying, well, how do I deal with this when I'm talking to my child? And it really resonated with me because I've got two young granddaughters. One of them's only about 17 months old, and the other is 4, going to be 5 in December. How do you have that conversation with them? Do you need to? Do you want to try and insulate and cocoon them from it and fend it off for as long as possible? And how do you approach that? And that, I think, is the most heartbreaking part of it all. Is to imagine that you would have to have a conversation like that in Australia is shocking for a start. But then, as a parent, you really, that's what really tears at your heart when you do have to have a conversation like that. So I guess the question is where we go from here. And one of the things that did surface in your accounts and the material was two things that struck me. One was the courage. And you sometimes hear these comments in the media that the Jewish community is in fear and afraid. And yeah, I think there's some trepidation out there, but what I see mostly is courage, and people actually rediscovering, and this is reflected in the book, rediscovering the Jewish community, their communal Jewish roots, and looking for that reinforcement and protection, as the Hebrew saying is, Sukkot Shlomecha, the shelter of peace, and some of the tremendous rabbinical roles that have been played there. And you've got an account from Jackie Ninio, who is just an amazing person who always strikes the right note, embracing the humanity of everybody's involvement in all of this, those who are suffering on all sides, and how does she bring her community together, and how do they heal together and deal with situations. And so it's that strength, courage, and rediscovering of community that seems to be quite a positive thing that's emerged from some of those accounts.
As I said earlier, while the book really emerged from a place of darkness deep in that rupture, we like to say the book strives for light, and that is something that I think many of us have been emboldened by one another's creativity and resilience. And again, like I said earlier, it was a very Jewish act to transcribe the times, right? But it also is a very, classically Jewish act to create through the times and through grief. And I think that each story offers that in a different way. And for us, it's really important that is ultimately what triumphs in this book. And it's not to sugarcoat anything. We wanted to be really authentic in how we portrayed the stories, and we purposely did not look for, happy endings everywhere and make it an easy book to read. We really wanted to let women share in an authentic way. But like ultimately let the light come through those cracks. And I think that for many women, Jewish women, who have read this book, the feedback has been that they've felt empowered and emboldened. So I feel like that has really come through. But I think for people looking in, and that is obviously, you know, major audience for us, the people who can have the experience of anti-Semitism illuminated for them. What does it feel like to live through anti-Semitism, not just this word that's kind of bandied about by politicians and weaponized against Jews and all that? Really give people looking in a sense that that's part of our heritage. And it's true that we have a lot of trauma in our, you know, DNA, and it's true that that comes out. It's often used against us. It's often turned against us. The weaponization of our anxiety is something that is such an ugly feature of this time. Like, I think that dismissal, like, oh, it's only, you know, what are you really, how bad is your pain really, when people in, you know, elsewhere are suffering so much, that we hear it really often. We've seen it a little bit on social media too in some responses to the book. Oh, you know, white women whining, again, hardly white, but, you know, the whining claim. And we actually want to say, no, these are our stories and they deserve to be heard. But like, we also want people to see how we build and how we keep moving, because that's the antithesis of being a victim, right?
Yes.
You know, and that's what matters to us. It matters to us to create light from the darkness. So that's
Yes,
really
and
important.
in terms of the other themes of resilience in the book, Tamar spoke before about many people who discovered more their Jewishness and came sort of into the community. And look, I'm by nature not a tribal communal person at all, and I don't think it's necessarily the best thing in the world to be part of big tribe. But what I do like about what is happening, and I think we have resonances of this in the book as well, is that Jews just tend to become started liking other Jews more. It, and I administer a support group for Jewish creatives voluntarily, and in our group, for example, it's a big group. It's 350 people. We have a lot of people from very different political spectrums, and
Yeah.
if in the past they would be at each other's throats, they kind of now come together lovingly because we understand that geopolitical opinions aside, we need each other, and we actually have a lot more in common. And another very positive thing that runs in the book, and I've experienced myself as well, I write about this in my essay, is creativity. I mean, Tamar previously referred very kind of in her very kind of characteristic, humble, self-effacing way to writing hobby. But she doesn't have a writing hobby. She's actually a writer, and I know that she's a very good writer. So, I mean, Tamar created this book.
Right.
But also, like for a lot of us, really, I think a lot of Jewish artists at the moment create practice with a sense of much greater urgency than before. I mean, when I couldn't, as you know, Mike, having read my essay, I couldn't write after October 7th for about 7 months. But then I realized, oh my God, I have to write. I don't have the luxury of not being able to write because there's so few Jews in the world. And every time, as Tamar was saying, when we try to speak about the book, somebody would come and say, you have no right to speak because of the suffering in Gaza. And while the suffering in Gaza is horrendous, I'm the first to say that, we're conflating things. We're conflating a foreign conflict with local racism. And so we have to speak up. We have to put our voices out there in any form, not just in writing. A lot of people sort of do it through music and visual art and filmmaking. But I think I just see a real renaissance of creativity at the moment in our community.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, the Jewish community, of course, has famously always embraced disputation and contestability. It's kind of part of that Talmudic tradition in many ways. And the old joke about you get two Jews together, you get three different political opinions. But finding, and this is a lesson for the whole of our society, really, is encouraging discourse to be civil. And what I find, when I'm engaging in social media, the responses won't be disputing my facts. They'll be a barrage of expletives followed by attempts at character assassination. And that's it. And usually all disguised under an anonymous handle, the courageous keyboard warriors. But, this is the thing, is that the community understanding that, that is something that is a precious part of the Jewish culture that can be transmitted to the society more generally, to provide that model for going forward. And when I think about, like you, I formerly thought of religion and tribalism as a curse upon the world, that created division and wars. And then I realized that just wasn't true, because humans would find anything to fight a war over that distinguished one human being from another. And there was a famous experiment in a school in the US a number of decades ago, the old blue eyes, brown eyes experiment. And how, people could be aligned against each other over the simplest of things. And so to me, what I realized is that it's actually religious diversity, ethnic diversity. These are the things that we have to force people to really embrace. And if Israel didn't exist, it really would have needed to be created, because the Arab world right now really needs to be forced to embrace diversity, because they're running a million miles in the other direction from diversity. All their societies are being purged of diversity. And so, I do think it's important to stand up and speak out and have the courage to do that. And it's difficult when you've got your politicians, like in one of the essays, someone refers to the comment by the MP, the Greens MP, Jenny Long, who talked about Jewish tentacles, and that the Jewish community didn't have any right to participate in conversations with other ethnic communities about the debate on Section 18C in race discrimination legislation. Like, you don't have the right to be an ethnic group, is what she's saying. And then sort of also amplifying those old tropes about Jewish tentacles. And then you get someone like Bob Carr, who goes on the One Path outlet, which is a sort of a conservative Muslim outlet, claiming that Jews control, their lobby groups have way too much influence, etc. And the irony that he's speaking on a platform that was founded with $1 million and is happy to speak about, their opinions on foreign affairs. So it's legitimate for him to be there on that platform and for them to be embracing foreign issues, but it's not legitimate for the Jewish community to have an opinion. And so this must be disturbing when you see politicians not talking out. And I guess we would all like to encourage them to follow the example of people like Chris Minns. And if they do take a stand, it makes it easier for our community and the Jewish community to be a safer, more embracing place in terms of diversity. Are there any other things that you would like to see emerge from this as a way forward to build on what you've done?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I would like a little bit more diversity. You speak about diversity. I would definitely like to see more diverse conversations in creative, media, academic worlds, all our cultural institutions. But we'll acknowledge not even, at the moment we're at the stage where you can't even insert a Jewish voice, and unless it's a particular Jewish voice that denies Israel's right to exist. So you can be even like Tamar and I for two-state solution, or wanting the war to end, and we still won't get until we had the moral clearance of absolutely wanting Israel to be erased, we will not get an opportunity to speak, or will be shut down completely. But I would like to, so this is, I would like to get over this first hurdle. But then the next step would be, which I would really love to see as well, both outside and inside Jewish community, is a bit like what's happening in the support group I manage. That there will be many more diverse voices within the diverse groups as well, and they won't be shouting. Before October 7, way before, one of my ideas for a new book was I want to write a book about having a conversation, because already 10 years ago I felt that especially since the emergence of internet, the art of conversation just was erased. As you described it, Mike, you say something and people just shout explicit. So I can't pronounce the word, but
Yeah.
yeah, at
I'll
you.
swear at you.
Yeah, yeah. And that happens constantly with us as well. I mean, when we try to talk out, not constantly, but like, I mean, in comments to all sorts of different podcasts and media that Tamara and I've been doing and our other contributors. So really, in my ideal world, I think the only way to move forward, to be honest, is to start teaching the art of conversation from school age, rather than saying, no, this is too sensitive. No, you can't say this. No, that's, I would really want to see that happening across our institutions.
Hmm.
That was my little rant, sorry.
No, that's great. And what about you, Tamar? Is there anything you'd like to
Um,
see building on this book? Or
yeah, I think that's something I've been grappling a lot with is this demand for performative apologetics lately. It's been really hard, something we've had to grapple with through our marketing. And I just, this book is really an attempt for us to speak on our own terms, and I would love for that to translate into action. I would love for people to listen to our stories on the basis of them being our stories and not having to engage in a lot of the acrobatics that some people expect of us or demand of us, that moral clearance that Lee was talking about. I have this concept in the high holy days, Jewish high holy days, we do the Ashamnu Bagadnu, where we beat our heart and we ask for forgiveness for all the different sins that we've done. I actually feel like we're expected to constantly be doing this Ashamnu Bagadnu. We're blameworthy, we're this, this whole I don't know exactly how many of these staccato words there are. It's a really profound part of the service, but it
Yep.
often feels that that's where we have to be these days, just to open our mouths, and otherwise our experiences are flattened, spoken about instead of speaking with us, it's spoken about by other people, and there's always an expectation that we're out, and we're sorry that. But no, I would like to see us being able to just be proud of who we are and unapologetic for who we are as Jews in Australia, and that that our voice can be heard on its own terms. That's something that would be nice, and that's obviously a cultural rebalance that has to happen. And I think that, someone who's dealing with some of the publicity now, I would, I had my eyes opened. I think the media has a long way to go in creating that space where the imbalance can be corrected only by systems shifting. And on the ground, we hope that this book can do the work of bringing people back to a centre of civility. And like Lee said earlier, it will work with some people who've had the most incredible responses from people across Australia who have sought out, a way to get in touch with us, whether it's through our publisher, the Lamb Library, or whether it's through Lee's website. However it is, we're getting all these messages from places. There are people who want that centre to exist in Australia, which has been really, really heartening and gratifying and humbling to see. But then there are these loud voices at the extremes that are pulling in these other directions and really have railroaded civil discourse. And I think the media are willing partners in that, and it's really disturbing. And the impact ultimately is that people feel like unable to just speak up and be
To
who
be
they want to be,
authentic.
really
We can't
be
even say that
authentic.
we have a
Yeah.
relationship to ancestral homeland. I mean, you have to apologize for this. And if you said, and
Yeah.
you immediately perceive as Netanyahu supporter.
yeah,
Yeah, and one other thing I'll add also is that, we've had some incredible people stand up and endorse our book in public, and we have to feel guilty that they draw the ire of some of these people. And I don't want to say that these people are brave. I want to say these people are great people who just read a book that moved them and they want to endorse us, or they want to, support us. But these people actually are brave because they open themselves up to a lot of hate, cancellation, and I don't understand how we're at a point in the world where people can't see one another's humanity for what it is. And it's really upsetting to see that and to have this kind of sense of guilt, like, oh, this person's getting attacked or, might be attacked because they thought our book was worth reading because it
Even though our
humanized.
book is not even about the war between
Not about politics.
Israel and Hamas, it's
Yeah.
about the impact that
Yes.
the community here
Yes.
experiencing because they've been blamed by what's going on overseas.
No, it's a very human work. And look, thank you so much for that contribution. This is a wonderful book. You can get it within a day on Amazon. It's you'll be, completely compelled by what you read. But also, this is such an important contribution because in order for us to build a better society, as I always say when we're dealing, for example, with the Indigenous issue, knowledge is very important. Putting yourself in another person's shoes is critical. And hopefully from that knowledge and flows understanding, and from understanding flows empathy. And once you have empathy, then that will shape how you behave and the decisions you make. So this is a really important contribution to creating the platform through which empathy can be achieved. So thank you for making that contribution. Hopefully, we will see better times, but it's better to die on your feet than live on your knees. And we do have to stand up and defend Australian diversity and social cohesion. And both of you have done a wonderful job in helping in that fight. So thanks very much. And thanks for being with us today. It's been a tremendous conversation.
Thank you so much,
Thank you
Mike.
so much. Thank you.
Cheers, everyone. Well, that's it for this episode of Frontlines and Faultlines, and we look forward to talking to you again, and including having the sort of character and the sort of people that we've just talked to today, and hopefully you've gotten a lot out of that. Cheers.